In this video, I wanted to share with all of you how I create a character for a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. I am in the very fortunate position that I get to play in a Dungeons & Dragons campaign as a player and not as a DM or GM for the first time in 4 years. So about a week and a half ago, I sat down and created my first player character in a long time. And I got to thinking that it would be interesting to share my process and hear a little bit about your process. So please let me know in the comments below how you create characters when you play Dungeons & Dragons. I'd be curious to see what the differences are and if I can learn something about my own process. Now, the last time I got to create a character for a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, it was 4 years ago. My friend Austin was running the campaign, and I had my first 2 characters die within the first 4 sessions. It was pretty brutal. So my third character was a paladin and was able to survive up until basically the campaign ran out of steam. And that's where that campaign ended. But I was excited to get started again in creating a new character. So I'm going to go through how I do that and what's my thought process around that. Before I get started, I do have a free Dungeons & Dragons encounter down below. Go check it out. Anyways, the first thing I do when I take a look at building a Dungeons & Dragons character is the class. I decide what class do I want to do. This is, to me, the most important thing that you'll be deciding when you create a Dungeons & Dragons character, because the class of the character is going to determine the type of gameplay that you'll be engaging in and that your character will be, good at. As an aside, there's another method that I use to create Dungeons & Dragons characters. It's the random method, which can be a lot of fun too, which is basically roll dice, see what you come up with, roll dice, see what you come up with over and over and over. And you get some wacky combinations, but in 5th edition, 4th edition, 3rd edition, it can be really, really challenging to use that random method and have a lot of fun during gameplay, because in these newer editions of Dungeons & Dragons, it's more fun, in my opinion, to play as a player if your character is good at things. Whereas in the older editions, you could still have a lot of fun if your character wasn't good at things, but in these newer editions, there's a whole lot of weight in the enjoyability of the game put around whether or not your character is actually going to be successful at the things that they do. There's a lot of skill checks, for example, that will unlock further points of the story or treasures or rewards. Where in the older editions, there was a lot more like player ingenuity that was needed to unlock those things. And so in the newer editions, I don't use the random method as much anymore because I think it's just not as fun, and you can end up with a character that isn't that strong, and a lot of gameplay can be kind of left away from that type of character. So the first thing I do, like I said, is take a look at what class do I want to be. The first thing the first part of that decision is what's going to be fun. Each class is a little bit different, has some differences around it, and each class is flexible, but it's still within some constraints. So for example, a cleric could be a battle cleric and good at combat, or it could be a support cleric who's casting spells to try and give your teammates boons, or it could be a healing cleric, but those are kind of the paths that you can take. Rogues are going to be sneaky most of the time. They could be kind of like brutal thug type rogues, but fighters are way better at that, right? So rogues are going to be sneaky. They could be stealthy burglars, or they could be assassins, but there's flexibility within each class, but each class still has a specific type of gameplay that you're going to be looking at. So what's fun? Most classes are very fun, so I usually move past that pretty quickly. And then I ask myself, what type of archetype do I want to play? Everybody listening, I hope all of you, I myself do this. We read fantasy books, we watch fantasy movies, we consume fantasy content, and archetypes begin to emerge within this fantasy content. You have the barbarian whose entire village was slaughtered by orcs, and now they're bent on revenge and vengeance, and they hate orcs more than anything, and that's what sends them off into a rage. That's a pretty strong archetype in literature and fantasy culture. Fantasy pop culture, and that's where the barbarian ideas kind of come from. Same thing when it comes to like thieves. There's money-loving thieves who are going to steal every chance they get. They're going to pickpocket, and that is what they do. And so dive into those archetypes and see, okay, which of these archetypes seem fun? Do I want to play like a barbarian that's like, oh, I'm so depressed and full of rage, or do you want to play that rogue that is going to be trying to steal everything, or do you want to play a sorcerer that is trying to learn and gain as much power as possible? Those are great places to start. And then finally, the last thing I look at is, especially as somebody who has a lot of years of Dungeons and Dragons experience, but most of that's DMing and not actually playing, but I want to get new experiences. So I try and see, okay, what is something different than I've done before? The last thing you can consider when it comes to class is talk to the other players in the group and figure out what they want to do for class and try and fill in some places that, aren't being fulfilled. So when I talked to some of the other players, I knew one of them was going to be a healing barbarian. I was curious in doing a cleric, but I decided that's, pretty close to a healing barbarian. I'm sorry, healing paladin. That's pretty close to a healing paladin, which is what this other player was doing. And so while I could focus in a different area of a cleric, I decided, nah, that's okay. I'm going to do something else. And then another one of my the players I'm playing with has a custom race, like a mushroom person, a shroomling, and they seem like a bard kind of, or maybe a sorcerer. It's really hard to tell after one session what they actually are. But I decided I was going to stay away from a spellcaster because of that. I'm also playing Baldur's Gate 3, and I'm a bard in Baldur's Gate 3, so I was like, okay, I don't want to do that. And what I ended up picking for my new character after all this consideration was Rogue. I realized that it fit well with the classes that our other players were doing, because we didn't seem to have like a high damage type dealer. I'd also be able to use a lot of these skills that would hopefully help us in the adventure, like pickpocketing or lockpicking or trap disarming and things like that, sneaking around, that type of thing. And then finally, I haven't played a rogue in a long, long time. It's one of my favorite classes to consider playing, because I love the idea of a thieves' cant, the special language that only rogues and thieves have. I love the idea of thieves' guilds, these kind of organized but chaotic organizations in cities that everybody's stealing and doing these things for a boss, and you can kind of earn your way up, or competing thieves' guilds and something like that. There's something fun about playing a rogue that I've always really loved. And so, yeah, I decided to go with a rogue for my character for this campaign. The second step that I go through is I try and figure out what is a twist on the archetype and the class that I chose. And for me, this is the most important step when I build a character, because I do use archetypes of a certain class to try and figure out what type of character I want to play. For example, that barbarian who is really depressed and rage-filled because their entire village was slaughtered by orcs, and now they hate orcs and they go into a rage every time they see orcs. To me, though, I've read a lot of stories about that type of character and seen movies and played characters like that, and I want something different. And that's what I do in my second step with the twist, is I come up with something different, some sort of backstory that might flip an archetype on its side. So, for example, if I'm playing a barbarian, I might be that rage-filled barbarian who's an orphan because their entire village got slaughtered by orcs, but I might take it a step further and say, my barbarian actually doesn't want to attack anymore, because they've spent the last 5 years of their life being a rage-filled barbarian and trying to seek vengeance for whoever delivered this evil to their village. But you know what? They're past that. They're trying to turn over a new leaf now, and now they're trying to be a little bit more peaceful. But you know what? Bad stuff keeps on happening to the barbarian, and they got to keep on taking their axe off their shoulder and jumping into battle, because even though they're trying to get away from it all, it keeps on coming back to them. I like the idea of turning an archetype on its head. Same thing, I've had ideas of a wizard. One of the archetypes for wizards is super nerdy, big into books, loves reading, loves studying, and I really like the idea of playing a kind of like a jock wizard that is at wizard school but doesn't study and is naturally talented at a few things, and relies on other wizards to study for them. There's a lot of fun that you can have with that. So the twist is all about finding how your character is different, but also motivation within your character. What is going to help motivate your character when interesting dilemmas come up during gameplay. Another thing I do during this step is I consider secrets or mystery. I think about my character's backstory and I say, what is a good secret or secret that I can reveal to the other players at some point during gameplay? Or what is a mystery that my character is currently trying to solve? And again, what these things do is they provide motivation for my character's backstory that I can then rely on when I am going through and role playing with this character. And then finally, the last thing I try and do is figure out, okay, what are some shortcomings of my characters? What are some flaws in my characters that I think they will be able to grow through as the campaign continues? Now this, I'll be honest, is a very challenging step for me, and it's the step that takes the longest for my current character. It took me about 3 or 4 days just sitting down and thinking okay, I have a thief or a rogue, right? I'm going to be using, but how can I put this thief rogue archetype on its head? How can I change it? How can I add some mystery or some secrets? And what are some of my character flaws? What I ended up deciding was that I loved the idea. I've played thieves and rogues before, where the rogue wants nothing more but to build wealth, and they will do that through almost any means necessary, including like taking really risky risks in the middle of a marketplace, pickpocketing a really wealthy merchant who's guarded, things like that. And I said, I want to turn that archetype on its head. I love the idea still of a money-loving rogue, but I want my rogue. There's a siren going by. I want my rogue to be able to, I want them to be different. And so I decided that my rogue was going to not want to steal anymore. That was a big part of their past, but I didn't want them to steal anymore because of something that had happened in their past. And that's kind of what I left it at this point. I said, okay, they're going to start the campaign in a place where they have had a successful thieving career, but they want out. They just don't want to do it anymore. This twist step is really challenging, like I said, and if you're trying out this method and you're stuck on it, I would suggest going to the backstory part of the 5th edition Player's Handbook and taking a look at the backstories, because those honestly do a really, really good job of coming up with some really good character motivations and backstories that can provide things like mystery or secrets or character shortcomings and flaws. There's literally a flaw section in that part of the Player's Handbook that you can use, as well as even there's some cool ideas where archetypes are turned on their heads in there. So at this point, I have my class. It's a rogue, and I have my twist, which is it's a rogue who has successfully had a successful thieving career, but no longer wants to steal or sneak around or things like that. From there, I begin building my character. So I go through and roll my attributes, strength, dexterity, charisma, wisdom, constitution, and intelligence. And then I also choose my character race. Now, the race part is always interesting. I always try and keep that to the past, or like after I've discovered my character or thought of my character twist and class, because I have a bad habit of always playing humans. I don't know why. I just feel like I can connect to them really, really well. And so I save the choice about what race I'm going to play until this step, because what I found for me is that allows me to play other races, and I'm like more open to doing that. And what I found when I was designing this character is that tieflings seem to fit very, very well, because tieflings are shunned, apparently, in some settings, because of their lineage with making devil contracts and deals with the devils and things like that. And also, they're very, very charismatic. But I decided, hey, let's put that on its head as well. And I was going to play an uncharismatic tiefling, and that's not a good combination, right? Because tieflings are already not trusted, because people see them as dishonest because of their connection with devilry. And if they're non-charismatic, that means that my character was going to have a tough draw at life initially. And that was a great reason for my character to get into thieving and stealing as a rogue, because if they aren't charismatic and they're a tiefling, their opportunities would probably be less than a charismatic tiefling or an elf or a human. And so that means that they would have to rely on other avenues to just be, just kind of begin succeeding in life and keep on going. And so I decided, okay, that's why my character got into thieving. It's because she didn't have a lot of, and I made it a she. That was kind of more of a random decision, but I made it a she. She didn't have a lot of opportunities because of her tiefling upbringing and because she was a non-charismatic tiefling. And so she had to rely on thieving to to basically live, to survive, and then to thrive eventually. After I do that, then I go out and I look at the classes. I update the stats and everything, update the features and the abilities and things like that. And then I finalize my character when I go into the background and the equipment part. This is, again, this is the best part about 5th edition, in my opinion, is the backgrounds. It's my favorite chapter of the book. There are so many cool ideas there, and I basically went through and just picked out the ones that made the most sense. Again, you can do a random method, and there's some really funny combinations that you can get with a random method, but for this character, I really felt like I had a good, strong core to the character, and I wanted to expand on that core by choosing the different backgrounds. Again, this is a part that you can use as a starting point if you're stuck on ideas on how to add depth to your character in that twist step. But I used it to kind of fully flesh out my character. So I'm going to look at my phone here because this is the write-up I did for my Dungeon Master, Nikki, about my character, Kaya the Tiefling. So, life can be tough for a tiefling, even more so for a tiefling born with one stunted horn and an unnaturally long tail. Misferus McSorry grew up poor and with few friends. She never thought much of the future until one day she saw another tiefling pickpocket a merchant at a market. "You can just do that?" was her thought. Her worldview changed greatly that day as she realized anyone can take what they wanted as long as they avoided consequences. She quickly took up thieving and burglary and found that she had a knack for acrobatic break-ins. For the first time, she began to appreciate her long tail and the balance it gave her. And for the first time in her life, she had food, money, and something that she was very good at. About 4 months ago, her crew leader, Malisus Savar, put her on a job that targeted one of Miss Ferris's few friends. Miss Ferris went along with the job knowing it would all be okay if she could just avoid consequences, if she could just avoid getting caught. Then she got caught. She lost one of her few friends that day. She suddenly realized the weight of her actions and that if she didn't see the result of her actions, that they still have consequences. So in a devastating personal crisis, she picked up and left. She's been wandering for months and has recently picked out Everdell as the idyllic place she wants to reinvent herself. She introduces herself as Kaya now and strives to make friends and be a positive influence on the world around her. She swears to herself that she won't take up burglary again. But she's running out of money, she has a stunted horn and no friends, and she's just so good at what she used to do. Maybe Everdell will be her personal salvation, but it could also be the place that puts her right back in her old ways. After all, old habits die hard. And so that's what I came up with. I'm really excited about the character. The first session went really, really well, and I'm excited to see how these future sessions go. I'm kind of delivering some of these story beats because this is all like background information about my character and the other players don't know about it. And I'm slowly going to trickle these out over the next few sessions so that they know a little bit more about my character's backstory. They already know that my character has like avoided stealing gold from the first session and stuff like that. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this character develops with the other characters. And yeah, I'm really, really excited about it. So let's wrap everything up here. I'd love to hear about how you create characters, what methods you use, how you come up with really cool ideas. Share them in the comments below. And don't forget, there's a free Dungeons & Dragons road encounter called Flirty Feast down below. Check it out. You can download it and hopefully enjoy it. So thanks everybody for listening, and I will see you in the next video.